Welcome to the Renaissance Sermon. I am Sleepy, your host and mystic for this particular episode, and we have a lot to discuss today, but of course we're going to start off with a prayer and meditation for those who are new. And at this particular time, I want everyone to close their eyes, okay? And we're going to start with some breathing exercises, okay? Breathe in through the nose, slowly if you will. Out through the mouth, okay. And when you breathe in, I want you to breathe into that lower lobe, that lower lung lobe, okay? So it should fill up your belly. That's what it should feel like. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Okay, good. Now, the idea is just to let all that tension, all those responsibilities that you have, any type of obligations you have, any type of credit card debt, say, you may have, just let it all go, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth. Good. Just let everything go. Especially the credit card debt. Now, what I want you guys to do is picture your entity of choice, or your entity of choice, and this can be whatever you imagine God may be, whatever you imagine, whatever deity you may have. You can even select a demon of choice. We don't judge here. And the idea here is I want you guys to imagine how much this entity is worth to you, okay? Now, what I want you to do is, whatever you have valuable on your credit card, I want you to use that, and I want you to go to, I want you to go to the coffee link in the description and show us all how much this deity or this entity is worth to you by donating to that particular link the exact amount. Good. Now, whatever entity that is, I want you to imagine it smiling at you now. It's good. It's happy. You made it happy. This was a great offering, if you will. Now that we got the important things out the way in terms of starting this thing, we're gonna kick off our particular episode, I suppose, with this astrology, right? So the astrology of note for this particular episode. This is currently, today we're looking at July 7th, 2025, and we had a full moon, particularly in Capricorn, on Wednesday. Now, as I say all the time, make sure you look up channels to really explain what this particular thing means. Plenty of good guys out there explaining all different types of aspects, and frankly, I don't think we've really hit the saturation point for really just people who need to understand more about astrology. So take your time, look into it, and really take that time out if you can. Also, we have upcoming, or currently, I would say currently for at least one of the planets, but another planet going retrograde soon. And these are slow-moving planets, particularly Neptune and Saturn, right? And that right there means they're going to be going retrograde, which means they'll be moving backwards if you're looking at a birth chart, right? This doesn't mean they're changing trajectory in the actual cosmos, or it doesn't hint at that at all, right? So the idea here is that they're going to be getting further away from Earth. That's what it suggests. That's what the actual retrograde motion suggests. But the idea here is that you guys need to understand something when it comes down to particularly the I won't say the complications, but the details involved in really observing astrology. And the idea here is that the retrograde pattern is something that's really known outside of the bodies of the sun and the moon, right? So those are consistently traveling in one direction if you look at a birth chart. But these other planets, they also really travel in retrograde, and there's a lot of different ways to look at that particular what's happening in a birth chart based on planets in retrograde as well as their aspects. Now, like I said, Neptune's already retrograde, but Saturn's about to go retrograde soon. And the idea here is that they're moving retrograde, particularly while this is, I suppose, of more importance is the idea that they're moving retrograde back into another sign, right? So the sun takes 30 days to move from, let's say, Aries to Taurus or something, or Taurus into Gemini. These planets, they don't move that fast, right? So when they go retrograde, particularly back into the sign before, then that adds an element of importance to what's going on. Now, this idea of them moving back, they're going to move back into Pisces for the last time, and then they're going to make one final transition into Aries before continuing on around the chart. And this is, like I said, I don't want to give too many details out, but you should definitely look into it. And like I said, the full moon in Capricorn, I believe that was on July 9th, and also the element of retrograde planets in general, whether you have them, and really just taking that time to maybe start digging deep into your particular chart as well. Our first segment, we're going to cover a topic that many of us may have heard about already, right? So this guy, Zoran Mamdani, he's he has a mayoral campaign going on and has really succeeded, particularly in getting the Democratic nomination, and major upset to some people, I suppose. But the idea here is that it seems like, I would say, establishment figures, both on the left and the right, are after this guy in particular, right? And despite them comparing this guy to Osama bin Laden, there are he campaigned on promises that were really, I would say, important to really us brokies out there, right? Because today we're going to be looking at this article by Sheree Taylor and Michelle Casquet to tackle this question of whether or not, particularly this idea of bringing free buses to New York City, is something that he can do, or just get the layout of the idea of addressing free buses in New York City. And apparently the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, also known as MTA, operates the city bus network, right? And interesting note here is that bus riders tend to be lower income than the subway, right? So the big argument apparently from the opposition is, where are we going to get the money to do this, right? Wiping out fares would cost the agency about $652 million annually, right? And that's according to a 2023 estimate from the New York Independent Budget Office. Now, to make this money, Mamdani has proposed raising corporate taxes and imposing a new 2% income tax on city residents who earn more than $1 million per year. Now, I'm not sure if this is news to you, but rich people are pretty desperate to stay rich. So this has faced some pretty serious opposition, especially from Wall Street. I mean, these guys, they only believe in socialism when they need a bailout, apparently, and that is not the case here. The argument seems to be, I mean, for these guys particularly, are just this type. I'll say it seems to be grounded in a moral base, right? And the idea is, hey, if you give free handouts, then what happens to the people who get those handouts? They become less responsible. And this is not really a vocal argument when it comes down to particularly the bailouts from 2008, or really the bailouts when it comes down to the COVID. Right? So with the CARES Act, these guys got $877 billion of taxpayer money. Billion with a B. This is, I mean, can't really make that up, that idea here, but it gets even more ridiculous early down the line. Crazy enough. Apparently people have been like revolting with this idea of, or revolting just when it comes down to riding the bus in general, right? So during COVID, they had a point where they stopped charging people for the bus, but people kind of just decided to stop or skip payment in a lot of cases. And I'm not sure about the actual bus payment system in New York in particular, but these guys are apparently, the article talks about how bus fares will provide the city with revenue, right? I think it was like $800 million. So $800 million total. I think that's without the actual bus fare, or without the actual expenses of, really, I suppose, the $652 million we talked about earlier, right? And this idea is interesting because talking about this idea of having a revenue, as we mentioned on the top of this episode, these are low income people, right? And they are dependent on for this income for the city, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because it's just like, well, you have, if you think about the cost of living in New York in general, I think there's already enough to that particular conversation. But when you think about just the idea of Wall Street getting all this money, it is, I mean, it's bad. It's really bad to think that this is an argument that people open their mouth and make, honestly. But when it comes down to just all the opposition's excuses, I mean, they really come out as very just disconnected and weak in general. But when we talk about this idea of where the power really resides in making buses in New York City free, this is actually coming from the MTA itself, so that's the Transit Authority, right? And the governor, right? So, and we'll talk about later in terms of what that means for Mamdani, but the idea seems to be that if, at least from, this is coming from a representative at the MTA, right? The idea is that if they have to really give bus fares for free, then they have to cut something else, right? I believe the statement was basically, hey, it sounds like Mamdani wants something for less of better quality, and he wants it faster or something like that. But the MTA sounded, I would say, the actual rap sounded very much resistant to the idea. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the actual culture that allows for such a thing. But I think what's really important now is that we understand that a lot of these guys should be, frankly, just replaced when they come out with statements like that in particular. And it does seem like that may be the case if we are, as a society, looking for this idea of people being able to make a stand for the middle or the lower class in any way, because these particular, I looked up cities that had free buses, right? And I was looking online for this, right? So cities, and I came across this article. It said like 20 cities that have like free buses, and I'm expecting just a whole bunch of just foreign places that have like just where socialism is kind of like the main system or something. And lo and behold, more than half of the cities on this particular article are from the U.S., are in the U.S., right? Or more, not cities, I'll say areas, because I'm not sure what particular designation that these guys have a lot of cases. But just to give you an idea, or just to run through the list real quick, we have Ketchum, Sun Valley, Idaho. We have Grant County in Washington. We have Fort Collins in Colorado. We have Fairfax in Virginia. We have Island County in Washington. We have Emeryville in California. We have Avon in Colorado. We have Boone in North Carolina. We have Wilsonville in Oregon. We have Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And we have Tucson in Arizona. And these particular cities, they seem to talk about or at least from what I've seen so far, these are good things result from the idea of free transportation, right? Or transportation that is within the city, right? So a few things would be better traffic, cleaner air, more people moving around the city to more places. Now that last part is very important, particularly in a society that depends on capitalism in a lot of different ways. But and for those that don't understand, the idea here is that the more people move around and the more exposure that they have to a particular area, the more likely they are to spend in various areas, right? Because the idea now is that Amazon is really basically just, I would say attracting a way larger percentage of really just commerce in general than honestly they should. It's really ridiculous to think that this weirdo can get like Jeff Bezos can get all this money and it doesn't like filter, like there is no real filter system for how this translates into the populace in any way, even though the populace is the one feeding this particular system. But when it comes down to essentially the city in general, right? I think we should understand something. When it comes down to cities, right? There's a particularly something that came out, or this idea of acupuncture architecture, right? And this is something that was really originated in, or not really originated, but it really stemmed from like kind of the traditional Chinese like methodology of acupuncture. And in so many words, it's basically addressing the failure of pieces of a city in acknowledgement that it helps the health of the whole city, and particularly, I would say, the magnetism of a city, right? Because when it comes down to this argument, it's never capitalism versus socialism, right? Because no society would be able to survive completely on capitalism. It doesn't work. Why would you want to not pay or why would you want to allow politicians to accept bribes? You know what I'm saying? Like this, it gets really dark really fast when you do that, and we're already seeing quite a bit of that now. But the idea here is that when you when you correct pieces of a city to start to essentially create magnetism for the whole, it's a different element of that you see. It's a different element in which you see the profit from what you do, right? From that particular investment, right? Because we can't depend on every single piece of the city to be a direct indication or a direct benefit in terms of profit, right? So particularly, I haven't looked this up and verified this, but I've heard, I'll look it up and verify it at some point, but I've heard that the idea of libraries in general, it came up in, I want to say Rome, when they say, basically, the idea and the sentiment was, hey, whatever we can do and provide for our citizens for free is really our indication of our indicator for a value as a society, right? And I'll say the idea now needs to be transformed, because we need to keep that sentiment, but we need to understand, what does that mean now, right? So this idea of acupuncture architecture, in terms of how it relates to this idea of a free bus system, we need to understand something. Free buses will essentially make the city more people will travel around in the city. That is what you want. If you are a business in that city, you want more people getting around and getting out. This idea of exposure, right? This is magnetism. This is why a lot of our cities right now are essentially failing, because they don't know how to create the balance to really create real magnetism, in my opinion. Now, the idea here is that we want to really create magnetism, and generate, essentially, more people getting around the city, of course, but also this cross-pollination, we'll say, between socioeconomic classes. That is important. We need that because a lot of these guys, particularly like just the ultra wealthy, they are suffering from a mental illness that a lot of us really just don't understand. And the idea here is that these people are so disillusioned with themselves. It is like it's crazy. It's honestly, it is so sad. But the idea is, and this kind of, I guess we'll talk about this and we'll actually talk about another thing. But the idea here is that I think we should understand that, particular for the sermon, I suppose, the idea here is Sagittarius would represent something that I think really relays this message in terms of the illusion or the disillusionment that a lot of these guys are under. And Sagittarius represents a lot of things, of course, but this idea of riches, that's Sagittarius. Fortune, all that stuff, right? But it's also representing of philosophy. It's representing of higher knowledge, right? So let's just focus on that for this particular idea. These people, they get particularly rich in whatever ways that they can, usually just uh, bribing politicians and if or just serving just people as a morally corrupt person, whatever they do to make money. The idea is they think that them having money is evidence that they are philosophers, Sagittarius, or even just a holder of higher knowledge, Sagittarius, when, to be honest, they're filled to the brim with people who are not disillusioned, but serve the disillusionment, right? They actually want these people to keep them, like, usually they're around people who are hiring them or are able to get money from them. So these delusions of grandeur are consistently served. But this cross-pollination, in terms of this idea of more people getting around the city, having more interactions, you start to realize just how human you are, you know? Like, a lot of these guys, seriously, and it sounds silly to think about it, but they really don't know. They don't know. Their lifestyles are completely different. And this is something that I think a lot of people need to understand when we talk about things like cross-pollination, and we talk about really just the idea of interactions between socioeconomic classes. Because, like I said, these guys, the way they talk in private, like, if your friend talks to you in a certain way at a bar and he says something stupid, you're just gonna look at him and say, hey, Fred, that was, please don't embarrass yourself, you know? These guys, they start like feeding poodles like braised steaks and stuff, like they will look at you. And if you are like the butler, you're just gonna be like, you're gonna be trained to keep a straight face. And that's how these people are. That's how these people interact with regular common folk, I will say, right? That's how it is. But I think I definitely went off script there. But the idea here is they're talking about, in this particular, in the NYC in particular, they're also talking about updating the transportation system, or with some kind of plan that's $68 billion. This is interesting because we use like this whole talk around, oh my God, this is going to cost however much a year or whatever, that like, you don't, to have this investment in terms of actually upgrading the system, we really do need to understand something. 68, they're going at this $68 billion, and we need to really get down to something, because we use, for those that don't know, we got a big five defense contractors, right? We got, in terms of, they receive 1/4 to 1/3 of the Pentagon contracts, right? The competition there, the so-called, like, people talk about capitalism and stuff like that, for, you know, like, oh, socialism is morally, you know, detrimental to people and stuff like that. But and who knows, I think there's an element to where we need to worry about how we combine things and how we do things. But to have that be an argument when you're being funded by any of the big five contractors, defense contractors in general, is hilarious. It's honestly hilarious. That I keep going off script, but there's one expense, like the most expensive, I would say, it's over $1 trillion it's going to cost us. And there's like a defense contractor who's charging us, but the actual product, I want to say it is a plane or a jet or something like that, but the actual product, I want to say it's Raytheon, but I'm not quite sure on that. But the actual product is filled with problems. they're like, it's just like there is so many things that don't work, and this is what you get when you have people or corporations who are experiencing exactly what these guys are trying to blow the whistle about. This idea here is we're looking at companies and that don't even have a clue about the idea of competing, making a better product, being more efficient. They don't care. They don't care because they pay the politicians for their socialism. You know what I'm saying? Like, they get it. They get the system, right? And it works for them. But I gotta get back on track. But the idea here is that all of these guys have this thing where that money's definitely coming to me because I'm in the system, and I know it's coming to me. And when it comes down to particularly things like this project that's coming up to update the transportation system, it's something I think that we really need to look into, because all of these cities that I mentioned before is definitely maybe places to start with. But the idea here is, are there contractors who are simply able to stuff money into their pocket and benefit from just the system in general? Because I haven't looked into this particular problem, but I will say that's definitely something that's something that we should definitely worry about, especially knowing the culture that's kind of really just permeating throughout our system in general. Now, this is, in terms of just the improvements in general, I would definitely urge any particular politician to look into stuff like this when you have big projects and you're dealing with the same, and you find a pattern where you're dealing with the same contractors. A lot of times those guys may be suffering from just the same idea that these big five defense contractors are, and that is, hey, I pay the politicians, I get my projects, and that could be a huge thing. Now, this idea of the governor and the MTA officials, I suppose, with this particular project, we need to understand that these guys may need to be subject to just more oversight, more third-party investigations in general, because what I find really troublesome is the MTA openly, or that MTA rep just openly speaking out. I would say that sounds like somebody who's very used and very comfortable with the idea of getting kickbacks and not having to really roll their sleeves up to do anything. So definitely something to look into. And like I said, I wouldn't throw out accusations like that, but that is very worrisome to think that this is a candidate and they're speaking out, period. It's just a total red flag in my opinion. But in terms of Mamdani in general, this idea of just coming into this particular system, I think we have to understand something. We can't stay completely clean while we clean up things. Like, that's the idea here. And just to give you guys an idea, there's a politician, right? Huey P. Long. He was a politician in Alabama, right? And he made noise, and he got a lot of things done, regardless of the fact that he had established opposition, very real established opposition. Maybe not as entrenched as some of these guys today, but still established, right? And I would say Huey P. Long wasn't, I wouldn't say he wasn't really a role model for what to get done exactly, but he broke rules, right? And he played politics like a pro. right? It's interesting because it's just like, I think when you have to get down to do certain things and you have really the right ends and the right means, you may have to do it. You may have to get this done. And I would say that, for instance, like the real engine, I would say, in my opinion, I think the real engine behind Trump's success and doing causing all of the stir that he's been causing is the fact that the establishment sees him as useful, right? That's the thing, right? He's like, I think the whole thing is, I would say, like, there is so much theater going on. Maybe not every single representative is involved with this, but I think a lot maybe, and I'm talking across the aisle, Democrat and Republican. Just the idea here is that I think there's a lot of theater going on here, and the idea here is that I think one of the main things to note here is that Palantir is not like it's not a partisan thing. You get Democrats on Palantir and Republicans on Palantir. If Joe Biden would have tried this, would have pulled this, create a centralized database in Palantir, yeah, it would have been, no, it would have been a riot. It would have been an absolute riot, and for good cause, honestly, for absolute good cause. But now they, it's just like, oh, well, our cult leader says, like, it'll be okay, like, I'm like, okay, right? Like, you guys will be like in that 5-minute city that we were talking about a few months ago. Like, what's going on? Don't know, but this kind of like, this is the idea here is that we need to understand that real pushback is going to be present, right? The MTA particularly, right? So this particular idea of free buses, it's the governor and MTA. The governor, I think, would need to face real opposition, and real opposition from, I guess, the people in terms of a real grassroots opposition. But the MTA would also, it's staffed by 23 voting members, right? And the mayor can recommend 4 of them. And in order to make good on whatever promises that Mamdani is coming up with, even when it comes down to, or especially when it comes down to this particular, or not especially, I'll say one of the things when it comes down to this particular situation, he's definitely gonna have to play politics, right? He's gonna need more people on the side. He's gonna need more people on the side and start to kind of, and not just more people, the right people, because you don't want to basically partner up with people who are very, very, like, growing very wealthy off of a sick society, and you have to kind of be careful with the idea of partnerships. But the idea here is that I want people to realize that, like these corrupt people, these like cartoonishly greedy people, they're not going to just wake up one day and see the error in their ways. All right, like we need to understand that that's not the way a lot of this goes. And in terms of actually doing what needs to get done with a lot of these cases, we need to understand something. We're in the position we are in because the good guys lost. Okay, that's how we got here. And I am sorry if you thought that there was gonna be some and I'm not like saying that I'm promoting something like for illegal in any way, but the idea of dirty politics that's pervasive. I mean, that's something that we need to really just have an understanding of in general, and understanding of in terms of actually fixing what we have now, requiring entrenched politicians to essentially, or entrenched people, entrenched entities to become entrenched in a lot of ways. And with this particular situation, it may be possible, but it is a, what is it called? It's a knife fight. It'll be a real knife fight. When I was a kid, I remember standing, and this is a pretty strong memory that I have. I remember particularly standing like right behind my parents, and we were in the living room watching like TV. And the news broke, and it was about particularly the ring of priests that were abusing kids, right? That was it was powerful for me because my mom always installed a fear in me by always telling me to watch out for predators. And she told me particularly, and really helped really entrench the idea of fear as a kid by telling me about particularly like my favorite uncle who was like abused as a kid, right? And I was like so heartbroken. Like I figured like the majority of society, they would never allow for something like that if the chance was really there to stop it in any way, shape, or form. Now, when this particular news story came up, I remember thinking that, oh shoot, you know, that the city might go up in flames at some point. And down the line, I'll say maybe like a few weeks later, I remember standing in the exact same position and watching the next news story and realizing that life was going to move on. And I'll be honest with you guys, I had like now I would say like I just came to the realization that the adults were just dickless cowards, right? That was kind of how it was for me. That's how I understood it. It's July of 2025, and despite all the contradictory evidence and statements, our current president, Trump, has denied evidence that there is this guy Epstein was trafficking underage children to elites. Now, Trump platformed on this idea of being an anti-establishment person who would come in and essentially make the establishment pay. So, I mean, like I said, it's July 2025, and all he's done is scam his supporters, or what we'll call MAGA right now, right? And just brazenly accept bribes. Like, not even like trying to hide it, how corrupt this guy is. And I want you guys to understand, like JFK, he was an anti-establishment figure, right? He was making the establishment and some particularly wealthy people very angry, right? And particularly, he was revising our relationship with third world countries. And these people and entities were very much extracting wealth from these countries. So there was a lot of anger, right? We're not going to throw out any accusations, because for anybody who knows how JFK died, that could be interesting to see that actually come out. But what's interesting is he saw this idea of the American Revolution as the beginning of a worldwide revolution, right? It was a starting point. And he wanted to see really just that domino effect take place across the world. And I think most Americans would agree that he wanted to really end the wars and do what Trump is verbally promising, while he's actually doing the exact opposite. Okay? Now, today, what you'll see, or what I'm seeing in July 2025, is a lot of MAGA creators. They're coming up with ways to dress this up, right? And in terms of the recent news with this guy. Now, during the 2016 election, when Trump was first elected, Epstein apparently mentioned that full disclosure would result in having to end the election based on what would come out about both candidates. Right? This Epstein and Trump have a pretty open relation, like they have a pretty open history, right? And these people are, these MAGA content creators are calling themselves truth tellers. And it is comical, honestly. Like, it is literally comedy to think that you can dance around that idea of Trump having a very real conflicting interest in being literally the establishment and try to find other people to blame, because it is it's crazy, because this idea, he's not, I don't think he believes he's fooling anybody. I would say what's really happening is he's sending a message, and the message is going out to the people who would essentially be found guilty if there was a real actual investigation behind this. And the message is that, hey, you can do whatever you want, and we won't hold you accountable. Because he is saying, he is using the we there. And that is, it's like repulsive to think that this can't get kicked off of, I can't get kicked off of YouTube, but this guy is like, he is just disgusting, honestly, when you think about it, because I think a lot of Democrats, a lot of people in kind of the middle and lower income areas of really finances in general, they hear Democrats say things like, oh, he's a criminal, and they think like, yeah, my cousin's a criminal. Like, what are you talking? Like, I don't care. Like, nobody cares. Like, everybody knows all y'all are criminals. Like, it's just like, whatever, but you don't really, and it doesn't relay the message of who Trump is, because when you hear him, like, in a lot of these tapes and a lot of the way he's talking, it's not that he's a criminal, like your cousin that deals drugs, or trying to sell cars. He is actually just a person, like a repulsive person in a lot of cases, and we need to really come to that understanding. Like, this isn't like the Democrats really can't say criminal and have any weight behind it, honestly. But what you'll see if you really dig into this and honestly understand, like, oh, this is not a guy that I would hang out with. Like, this is like I got friends who were just like, not just they who may have like danced on the borders of society in terms of what they do and get involved with. There's absolutely no, like, this guy, he leans in, he starts talking, and it's just like, yo, get away from me. What do you like? It's not. It's and we gotta understand that this idea of and I think this is kind of part of the reason why Democrats, I would say, are also invalid now, because they can't they can't call out. They can't call them out. They can't say anything, because it's just like, well, the reason why the reason why they won't say anything, which is crazy. I've heard like content creators say things like, they're trying to dance around and trying to see what they can get away with. It's honestly embarrassing. There's like a CIA representative, and they're a politician. I'm not sure exactly what position they hold, but the CIA politician is just an open spit in the face. But also the idea of a billionaire politician as well being platformed by Democrats, it is sickening to think that we're here right now, to think that you can smile in anybody's face and think that this is something. But in terms of right now, we got to understand that these guys are invalid too, right? But I think it's important to understand something. Like, we got these guys here, in terms of the content creators, they are saying things, essentially just feeding just red meat to whatever, and is very profitable in terms of keeping keeping this going, keeping this game show going. And it's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of like how Elon's still viewed as a genius and how he came up in general. But the idea here is that a lot of these guys, a lot of the base, they are very loud and vocal, right? So they may not make up a large percentage of the views, but they'll make sure that they show support, right? It's very interesting. And this idea, I mean, just having kind of just this established few that are loud and vocal, I would say that is something. I would say, for instance, with Israel, right? They seem to be using the same playbook, honestly, because a lot of kind of what you hear and what goes on, there are people who just they follow the script, and I mean, a lot of cases they're just not really waking up to the fact of what's going on, but a lot of cases is just that they are severely, like, mentally ill people sometimes, and that's the environment that kind of that's created there. And I mean, Americans, thank goodness, are they're waking up, I think, to the fact that they're not going like full blown like white supremacists with this whole or not Nazi stuff. They're going like they're really waking up to the fact that like the Israeli government, they don't represent like Jewish people any more than the CIA represents American people. And that's important. That's very important, because you don't want that pendulum to swing too far to the other way. Definitely not. But in terms of with this particular situation, I believe that I had kind of like the idea, right? The idea of really just this being a cult, because I don't use words lightly, right? I didn't throw this word around when Trump got elected. And I didn't even throw this word around when he started like hawking meme coins. But really, I think when he started like openly expanding the surveillance state on Americans by nudging Palantir to create this centralized database for efficiency, and none of the creators were really coming out, right? Like the ones that did, they just look really stupid because they were trying to like make. They like was it Alex Jones said what is it, Palantir is like the small AI company, the underdog AI company or something like that. It was really embarrassing. But the idea here is that I knew when I didn't see like real genuine pushback that this was like essentially a cult. This was like at that point, it don't say that you can't you can't be taken seriously by just regular people if you say that this idea is anti-establishment, so you're gonna give the establishment more power. Like, like, it's just like, what are you talking about? But I don't know, really. Like I said, Democrats, they're invalid, right? I would definitely say that. But this needs to be a real thing, because, like, you got, did I mention the content creators for, like, Democrats right now? They're figuring out ways. Yeah, I mentioned the CIA stuff or whatever, but the CIA politicians, but there are actual content creators online who I would say, like, I would guess that they're being funded by some very shady people, because they're very popular, getting a lot of light, but, like, they're pretending like it's totally reasonable to think that Epstein killed himself. And that is crazy. That's crazy. It's just like, well, I actually, like, stood in front of that mic, you stood in front of that camera, you said that's stupid. Like, yeah, I just can't believe some of these people. But they actually said, like, okay, well, I actually do believe he killed himself. Like, it's just like, they're not going out openly and saying that, well, some of them actually may be like, oh, there was no client list or whatever. It's just like, or there was no list of clients to really dig out and stuff like that. But it's just like, they're not gonna fight, right? The established Democrats, they're that's not going to be a thing, right? They are, like I said, a lot of these guys, I think, are in the theater. They are or in the actual show themselves. We need to understand that, and particularly, like, I think we should definitely follow through with, like, kind of labeling Trump and the people that follow, like, these weird ICE people who are, like, just going through with masks and just trying to kidnap people and like, this is happening. Like, this is genuinely happening, and I'm like, that's interesting. Like, I don't see this as, like, this is deep state sanction to me, honestly. Honest to goodness, this is deep state sanction. Like, whatever's about to come up, we haven't seen it yet, but whatever's coming up right now, people are, the Democrats, I'm like, oh my God, Trump. Like, yeah, okay, sure. No, like, just to give you guys an understanding of how, like, just this idea, like, J. Edgar Hoover, there was a president that came in and they wanted to remove J. Edgar Hoover. That's the guy who started the FBI, and he was entrenched so hard that he made it difficult, right? He made it, I mean, not difficult, he made it just impossible to really just remove him. And it's hard to believe that none of the Democrats, like, all of the Democrats are just like, oh my God, these 20-year-old goons are coming in and, like, like, I'm trying to imagine, like, I just see, like, if somebody like Seymour Hersh was around, he just smack one of these dudes, like, yo, go back home. Go back, like, go and tell Elon to come here, I'll smack him too. Like, what, like, tell what is this? What are we talking about? But I'm just pretty upset with this idea of where we're at now, because in terms of this particular situation, I think it's really, I think, I'm not MAGA by any stretch of the imagination, but it hurt, because not because I trusted, Trump because he's the second coming of Jesus or anything like that. I really genuinely, like, feel like this like orange pedo just put me in the position that my parents were in I had to really realize, like, standing behind them watching life go on as they watched the news. I feel like they put me in that position, and that's really what I find unforgivable and genuinely disgusting. I'm gonna add a segment to the end of this video, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see.
Big, powerful America, and shoot them for what?
On that continent, we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other.
With the last words on my lips, that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that.
Yeah, sure. If I
Could I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep?
She filed a lawsuit against the Epstein estate just 6 days ago.
The main thing he did when I walked in, I thought was interesting, he showed me where the men monitoring everything were. I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, bed, toilet, bed. I'm like, I am never going to use the restroom here, and I'm never going to sleep here. It was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments.
If there was a video of some guy or gal committing felonies on an island, and I'm in charge, don't you think you'd see it?
This creep, 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 this creep. This creep, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep, this creep.
How do you know this?
That was close to straight. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind.
It was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments.
She believes there are tapes. The question is, who has them?
He's a horrible human being. In Jeffrey's book, he does nasty things to his best friends' wives. Anyone he first tries to gain your trust and then uses it to do bad things. That's how it goes.
Now, in this segment, we're going to be talking about particularly the idea of war crimes, right? So we're going to continue down this series of articles on war crimes in general. And this particular article was made by Maggie Michelle. In the article, it really mentions, it's focused more so on teaching how to really investigate attacks on civilians, right? But it gives some very important insight in terms of how to view this idea of war, and particularly when it comes down to just crimes that are outright done against civilians in general, because it's important to really understand something, I think, when it comes down to this series and segments, because this is the second time I came into contact with this idea of core principles, right? So there's two core principles when it comes down to a lot of these things, and that's distinction and proportionality, right? So in the last episode, we talked a little bit, but the idea of distinction is that civilians are essentially any persons beside an actual combatant, right? And that's defined by the humanitarian law, right? And someone could be in the army as a medic and they're not considered a combatant, and that's the idea there. And proportionality is the idea that you can justify a targeting based on the risk that you put to civilians in a situation, right? So, I mean, if you bomb a library because some you know, some target of interest went into that particular library, you better have a really good excuse, because that's going to be that could certainly be international law, even though these guys not even, I mean, it is so hard to really view these guys as having teeth in a lot of cases, because this guy Netanyahu is out there just, I mean, brazenly going on camera in the U.S. and, you know, I'm not even a criminal. It's like he didn't even like respond to allegations, and at least the last time I read, he didn't even respond to the allegations of him being an actual like war criminal and targeting civilians and starving civilians. He just, it's just another day. You know, like, it's crazy. But apparently, like, if you, let's say it does get teeth at some point, which I'm really hoping that it will, but at some point that would put you in a position, if, say, for instance, just going back to bombing any civilian infrastructure and not being able to come up with a good excuse in terms of the targeting that went on, you know, it's definitely something to hold on to. I learned in terms of just being the second time that I'm coming to this in the second article. Now, violating either principles of proportionality or distinction, they would constitute a war crime, but some other specific war crimes against civilians would include, but they're not limited to, this is a quote directly from the article, torture or inhumane treatment, unlawful deportation or transfer or unlawful confinement, taking of hostages, transfer of civilian population into occupied territory, or deportation of the population of the occupied territory, pillaging, use of prohibited weapons, rape or other sexual violence, use of human shields, starvation as a method of warfare, and recruiting child soldiers. And a lot of these guys, they're just crimes, even if you commit them against combatants, right? But the idea of, I suppose, the article really talks about documentation, because a lot of times this isn't a straightforward thing. Even the principles aren't a straightforward thing, right? The principles of proportionality or distinction, you want to be able to make that case when you can, when you want to accuse people in certain cases. And I mean, talk about this a little later, but the government, there's, like, when it comes down to war and the government, they're not really excited about, like, just hearing about war crimes in general, and usually because they're the person committing them. But the idea here is that even like cultural, religious, and historical background of a conflict can really become important when you when these things are investigated, right? And the article, it provides like it provides research centers and also like information, just and other sources of information on conflicts. But I'm gonna add the idea that it's important to always make sure that there's no real conflicting interest in how these things are covered, based on, you know, going through, you know, these different centers and think tanks, right? Because I hate that these guys always come up, but I mean, I suppose they're in the news. The idea of, they're currently doing things that constitute essentially war crimes, right? But the idea here is that Israel gets very favorable coverage, right? They're very much invested in essentially just making sure that the journalism in general is favoring them in a way, right? Because that's how that's how they continue doing what they want to do. And and we'll talk a little bit later. They actually come up again, which is crazy. But the idea we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the article, it really does go over, I suppose, interview and investigation strategies when dealing with victims and criminals, right? So a lot of these case studies, they really bring out how authorities will lie, and even talk about like how they'll actively target like journalists when it comes down to covering up war crimes. Now, there's out of the case studies, there's four mentioned, and then they talk about some a particular lady who was or a particular journalist who was just really award-winning journalist, I suppose this we'll call her. But the idea here is that one is the case study in Yemen, and this is a case where essentially the U.S. was claiming that all of the victims of drone attacks were Al-Qaeda, right? But through investigations, they found that 1/3 of the Yemen U.S. drone strikes were killing civilians, or 1/3 of the victims in U.S. drone strikes were killing civilians, right? And the investigation was extensive in terms of it really does seem like pretty amazing to think that these guys were able to get down in the trenches and really get that and get some very real journalism done. But it's worth it. It's definitely worth it here specifically, right? I think it's worth it in every case, but here specifically because drones are a very unique problem, because this idea of drones, they allow for really the gamification of war, right? And that idea of the gamification, it more so pertains to like people who are just demented, but it also like doesn't necessarily have a gamification aspect. It just has a real scarring effect on people who, let's say, aren't so demented, right? Because people or drone pilots, right? People who are just piloting drones from across the world, they'll suffer from PTSD, and they'll be kind of confused and possibly even embarrassed, right? Because it's just like, I didn't really get shot at, but I have I'm like struggling with this, and that idea here is, I mean, like I said, I imagine you get more crazy people as drone pilots, who are willing to do XYZ, but we need to understand something. They're like, it's more palatable to the American populace in terms of drones and drone warfare. But the destruction is very much real, right? Because just to give you guys an example, like drones will launch an attack and hover while they sit there and just wait for their target to have some kind of confirmation on the target. And while they hover, like people around that area where it was, they just completely destroyed, they will hear someone in rubble just like absolute, like just screaming for help, but they also hear the drone. And the culture for anyone apparently who's like unfortunate enough to really be a part of drone attacks and be on the receiving end of drone attacks, they understand that hovering, it means that there could be a second attack. So they just have to hear the screams or hear the cries for help, and they can't do anything about it, right? It's crazy to think, but it's life for a lot of these guys, particularly when it comes down to the people that won't give us their oil. But the idea here is that we need to have this understanding instilled in us that drone warfare is war. It's not something like just because there aren't American lives at risk. We need to understand that it is still war, right? Because our government right now, I mean, particularly, we're trying to move into a forever war, right? Because that is a very real initiative, right? And I think we need to understand that this drones, they're unique in their idea and really just their selling point to the American populace. Like, oh, it's not American citizens that are at risk. And that could be a tremendous problem in the future. I mean, when it comes down to Yemen and this situation, the families of victims, they called upon human rights groups and the International Committee of the Red Cross to further investigate these drone attacks after they, like, this particular, like, after this founding came up. And they had no real avail in terms of no real success in getting actual accountability. Let's try to run through the next ones. Myanmar, they were found to essentially have this, have uncovered something that was originally advertised as a clearance operation. And this is essentially the government or the people in power covering up war crimes, because they were essentially just committing a genocide, and they were particularly targeting the Rohingya. I hope I'm saying that right. And it was just, I mean, it was an investigation done, and like I said, look at the article, it kind of goes into it, but just the idea of getting in and having to do those investigations is absolute, or just doing those investigations is some really dangerous work, which brings us to our next situation. With Ukraine in general, apparently Russia and the journalists not in Russia, but the journalists who were investigating essentially the war crimes of the Russian army, they were being targeted for their actual reporting of the information, right? And there's a particularly a quote from one of the people who who won a Sundance Audience Award. I'm sorry, this is a very serious situation, and it should be handled with as such, but I just can't help but think, like, this guy, this particular investigator, won a Sundance Audience Award, and I'm trying to think, like, wow, I wonder what it would take for, like, the people investigating Palestine to get that. Like, I'm not making light of what Ukraine is going through, but the idea of, like, I can't get an award as a journalist and honestly take it seriously if I was in that position. And when it comes down to Palestine, the killing of a journalist, they had, like, essentially Israeli soldiers trying to blame Hamas for killing and targeting of a journalist, but they did some very extensive investigations in terms of, like, I'm talking, like, using, like, when the camera feed died based off of when they heard the bullet to find out how far it was, the trajectory of the bullet, stuff like that. And they showed that this particular bullet, not only was it kind of common for, just the Israeli army, but it was more so, like, the position itself, the position that the bullet came from, the distance. It all lined up with the idea that Israeli soldiers were on the end of that, and it wasn't, Hamas as they reported. And this last piece, it was this very interesting article, very interesting woman here, Azmat Khan, and she's a Pulitzer Prize winning member of the New York Times Visual Investigations team. and she's apparently really investigating the civilian casualties of remote warfare in Iraq. And like I said, this is important. It goes back to kind of the drones being able to kind of gamify war. Those things are very dangerous when we get down this rabbit hole. She talks about particular tactics, and I think honestly I'll say like this, I'll kind of just touch on it. Jeez, I'm running out of time. But the idea here is that most of like the journalists here really, but the journalists here had something to do with it, but especially Azmat Khan, in terms of actually like inspiring a particular story where I'm thinking about an actual story where an actual, a journalist, a woman finds herself in a particular position, or she becomes a journalist in a particular war-torn situation, and she starts to really investigate war crimes and starts to realize more and more and more about war crimes. And at some point she teams up with a particular guy. I don't want to make this sound too interesting because I do not have it like lined up yet, but it's very interesting to have that particular idea come about here, and it was inspiring. Please check out the article. I'll have it linked. But the idea of illusion in terms of particularly with the forever war, because how many of us really felt that we were in a war in Iraq until we pulled out? Like how many people felt that? You need to understand that this is not what we should we should understand what's going on and have a very real consequence and a price, because we're feeding a monster. We are feeding particularly the big five defense contractors, but also some other ones that we're feeding, and we really don't know just how bad it gets. And that's a very serious warning, because like with this what I would call a deep state sanctioned clearance of the government, in a lot of cases it seemed like you guys may be like, hopefully I'm wrong, but you guys may be surprised at just how fast foreign soldiers are able to walk down the street and tell you to get inside your house. And that's the transition to there, the blockades from there. We should really understand that, because I've done another segment in another video where I talk about just a grave warning. I think that's what the segment's called. Please look into that. But the idea here is that politicians they're already salesmen, right? They're salesmen abroad. They're salesmen for the defense contractors. They're salesmen for Monsanto. And they are more than willing to betray a populace that is not informed about what's going on. And the idea is their real constituents are their donors, right? Or the people who are blackmailing them. That's what we really need to understand and realize. This report it's both sweet and bitter, right? Because this is about a team that essentially got together and created like a network, right, for particularly investigative journalists. And these guys got together at a journalism conference, apparently in Bulgaria, where they started trading notes, and they came to a realization that essentially there were criminals who were international, but they couldn't be held accountable across borders of countries. So they created this database, and this database, kind of evolved over time, and it's become something that really keeps criminals and corporations accountable, right? and they really apparently got a lot of attention through the cross-border investigations. And like I said, it grew and it became an outlet and something that was actually instrumental in terms of the Panama Papers. I'm not sure if I said the Pandora Papers before. I feel like I've been messing that up consistently, but I believe it's the Panama Papers, right? And that is, eventually they like developed a system of lawyers to help fight lawsuits that are essentially just ways to keep journalists from discovering crimes. So they'll sue them for just whatever, right? Like, oh, that photo that you had, you said was a certain color and it was colorized and it wasn't colorized, or something like that. They'll find a way to throw something in the actual gears. And usually like there's a lot of lawyers that are good at that, but I suppose the bitterness of this really comes in from them being really hit from this new initiative to essentially just defund any and everything that keeps anybody accountable, right? And the idea here is that they've always wanted to diversify this income that they've gotten, right? Because they're apparently they were heavily relying on governments, and they realized that it was a conflict of interest. But this particular idea, what's going on now, it came sudden, right? It wasn't something that they could really prepare for. And I mean, I don't think Elon's really competent enough to really just see far ahead, unless these guys were actively just investigating him. But I do this particular idea does make me think that maybe there was a targeting of this particular funding system. It'd be interesting to look into that. No accusations there, but I do feel like this idea is mentioned, right, in the article about what's happening in terms of how people particularly get something called corruption fatigue, right? And that's throughout the society. It is permeating throughout America, right? We corruption fatigue. The Panama Papers, they come out. There's 2 countries in that were involved in that in terms of their politicians who actually revolted and had their politicians removed from office. It's a lot harder to imagine that here, and I think that is due to the idea of corruption fatigue. We've kind of allowed this for a long time. And what they really want is they want a way to get, or they really seem to want a way to get information, or to package information in a powerful way, basically, right? And I'm already in the passion. I have a passion for creating really just entertain or packaging educational content as very much entertaining in a way. And I think there's a way, I would say, to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here, because if they can really do what I'm thinking right, then these guys can profit off of a series just creative partnerships, games, and a lot of media or whatever. And these guys can if they can do this the right way, they can help create this new network, because I do think it's going to be up to us here, right? These guys, you can't be third party and depend on government in any way. You can't really perform thorough investigations and depend on government when it comes down to corruption, right? So we gotta really start thinking about what we need to do and how we can do it. And in this particular renaissance, we should definitely look for ways to leverage artists and creatives and this idea is something that can be particularly effective when it comes down to addressing corruption fatigue, as we mentioned. And if we really do this right, there's plenty of money and opportunity when you really clear the board of corruption and just the weird tech bros who want to become gods of humanity. Now, in this report, we're going to talk about how Trump and RFK are helping make America healthy again. And just the spoiler alert, they are not. And this is at least not in regard to the EPA, right? I think a lot of people, they really need to understand something, that this particular term, I think it's very much different than his first term, and we should definitely have that understanding rooted in society, period, because the more I'm looking into this this administration period, it just feels like a deep state sanctioned liquidation, right? This is, and where this particular article, it talks about really forever chemicals and the regulations, and that they've been facing from particularly Trump's first term to the second term, but also, or how he's been handled from the first term to the second term. But it also mentions Biden as well in terms of how things were under him a little bit. And just to give you guys an understanding, in North Carolina, they had some bombshell newspaper drop that informed everyone that the drinking water was infected with forever chemicals. And that particular article, it set everybody ablaze. And this is on script, but a side note here, I think you guys should understand this. This idea highlighting how important that local papers and local media are in general, we really need to focus here, because in Sarah Wynne Williams' book, right, she talked about Facebook and told a story about her becoming a whistleblower, right, because she used to work for Facebook for a long time and she was really high up. And Mark Zuckerberg, I remember a point in this book where Mark Zuckerberg was confronted with the idea of Facebook potentially interfering with local news, right? And this freak, he said basically that that's not a problem that needs to be worried about, right? And these weird tech guys, they get in and they think they're gods, and you get some very monstrous things happening. Because I can imagine it's a lot easier to sell us that report if you're in with Facebook, now that connection for corruption can get that net that we're in can get really tight really fast. And we really need to work on that in terms of what's happening now and correcting our relationship with technology and just the technology out there in general. Now, back to the report, the idea here of Trump's first administration, this bombshell report in North Carolina came out, and they responded to this by creating an actual plan to strengthen regulation of forever chemicals, right? And interesting, because the second administration, they've been making statements and doing literally the exact opposite the next day. The next day, they were defunding research that were looking into finding the harmful effects on farmland where our food grows. They were looking at the health risk involved with being exposed to drinking water, and these were the people on the brunt end of what the defunding going on. And it's crazy because it feels like Czech Republic, right? Because we talked about in episode 1 where the I believe it's the prime minister, he was essentially on the crosshairs because the river, his factory was essentially poisoning the river, and it caused almost, I want to say 50 to 100,000 fish were dead because of the pollution and what was happening. And this is like, in Czech's Republic case, it was the prime minister's actual business, right? Like it was his factory that was responsible for it. But in this second administration, the way that kind of things have been going, it is like, this is clownish level of corruption, right? And this is like, if these companies will give Trump money, I think he'll do whatever they say. I don't think it even matters at this point. And we have to understand that, because even in like Project 2025, they were talking about, they expressed specific interest in deregulating the forever chemicals. And it's like, it's capitalism, baby. Like, it's just like, what? But under Biden, between the Trump first administration, where there was actually talk of strengthening regulations of forever chemicals, Biden actually expanded the initial plan, right? There was the plan to, like, he actually wanted to include more chemicals, but I mean, this is crazy, because like Trump, RFK, and the ketamine addict want to cut spending while they keep actual corruption going. It's insane. But this particular idea, what's been happening, it's been leading to scientists being fired and less funding for the research that goes on. And I just want to be completely fair to RFK Jr. He really may be busy with finding, the autism and anti-Semitism causing chemicals that lead to all people, like, maybe criticizing Israel. But I mean, honestly, it's disgusting and an embarrassing joke to think that this guy's related to JFK or RFK. And in this Renaissance, I think we really want to we really need to understand something, that we're not getting the second coming of Jesus. It's not going to be one person that comes and magically stops all the corruption and ends everything. We should understand this idea of, I think a lot of us have really come into contact with the idea of being in the age of Aquarius, in terms of come across that statement. And Aquarius represents groups of people. It represents networks, and it represents just the idea of revolution in general, right? And those things, when you put them together, you need to understand that they come together as a package in a lot of cases. It's not going to be one person. It's not going to be one individual. When they look back in history, it needs to be understood, or it's going to be understood, that it was a large population of people who stood up, or it just simply never happened. Interactive fiction, right? This is something I've talked about in terms of my passion to package just education package education with real, genuine, like, entertainment in a lot of cases. But this idea of, like, interactive fiction in general, it gives me hope, because I really find there's a tremendous overlap with the idea, or with what I'm trying to do in this here in general, right? Because I'm gonna tag a YouTube video on interactive fiction, and this is my YouTube channel called Chris Chinchilla. And the video, particularly, it goes over the past and the present and the future of interactive fiction. And the video is only 20 minutes long, but it gives a real a solid, I think, what I would call a solid understanding of the world of interactive fiction. Because this didn't just start today, right? We didn't just get this, like, Sleepy didn't just come up with this and something. But that idea of interactive fiction, it's important, because that it's really essentially just stories or things being told in a way to where the person or people who are interacting with this particular video, like we pull up a screen on YouTube and we can watch it or whatever, but you pull up something that's interactive, so like interactive fiction, you're able to kind of like the video stops at some point and it asks you certain questions, or you have diverging options. Like it depends on the watcher or the user or the player in terms of games. And it is interesting because it's like in history it never took off, right? Or I would say it never took off the way I would have liked it to take off, but it was definitely something that was really embedded in storytelling in a lot of cases, but also board games and other things that were essential in comics as well. They were just like some people who were very much invested in this, some creators who were very much invested in the idea of creating interactive fiction. And like I said, look at the video. It's really interesting in itself in terms of that idea of just being able to interact with actual content, or games in any way. But I really do want to be a part of really the helping really promote this idea and refine this idea to help it be given to more people, right? Or to help spread information in a certain way. And today there's an application called Twine that essentially the YouTube video goes over this, but I also read like an article about how this is essentially a way to gamify journalism in any way, in many ways, but I think it's got like my background noise exploding in terms of the possibilities here. But the idea here is that like we mentioned in the interactive, or not the interactive, but the investigative journalists who came up with their own particular database, and that eventually grew into an outlet in terms of them looking for particular ways to gain more funding, but also fight the idea of corruption fatigue in terms of have people more interested in their particular knowledge base or their particular investigations that they spend a lot of time on. But this idea, what's happening here is, I think we need to understand something, because this is, we need to think about this idea of cost benefit, I would say, right? Because as a society, like more literature in terms of more people or more books being made is great, but we're not seeing the payoff in terms of cost benefit, I believe, in terms of the way we're doing things today, right? Because if you look at, I suppose, an S-curve, right? So this is kind of more sciencey language, but you can pull up an S-curve and look at it. If you look at the graph, you'll see that there's a point of essentially what they call diminishing returns, right? You're investing in, you're creating all of these particular things, but they're not having the same effect, right? And this is, I think I want to give you guys an analogy that I really hope y'all are not too familiar with, but at some point, like if you add sugar to Kool-Aid, right? The idea here is that you can keep adding sugar, but at some point, the sugar would no longer make the drink sweeter. There would just be piles of sugar that come out of the actual drink, or what we call a solution, come out of solution to pile up on the bottom, right? And I would say that sugar that's piling up on the bottom, I think we have a tremendous amount of books that are that are simply just piling up and collecting dust. And the knowledge in those books could be extremely useful, but it almost seems like we're just saturated in the way that we're facing diminishing returns in the fact that we don't see these books being digested by the populace. And no matter how many books we add to the particular situation, I feel like we'll still get the same results. And we need that. We need to change that. And we got to get more effective in passing on information, particularly when it comes down to the next generation, right? And I think that's going to be really due to creators, right? And creatives, right? Because they should become teachers and vice versa, right? Interactive fiction, it really does seem like a way forward, right? And this idea, I think, is a good analogy is in the futuristic society, like movies that we watch. We'll look at like grade school kids that have like doctorate level education, right? And when we like move into that society in real life, we'll have to start to make strides toward that, right? We can't keep looking at kids and saying, oh my God, these kids are weaker than us, or they're whatever. Like, I've never seen people so proud to fail in my life. Like, they'll sit there and they'll look at the next generation and they'll be like, oh, these guys are just, they're so ridiculous. And it's just like, that is crazy that you think that this is like your failure or something to brag about, but it is in so many cases. But that idea, we need to work on that. We need to work on improving that, right? Leaving something for the next generation, that platform that gets us one step closer. And nobody wants a more informed populace. Nobody wants a more educated populace, right? These the people in power, right? The ketamine addicts, the politicians, the billionaires, or like even podcasters, except for me when it comes down to podcasters, aren't going to do this. In terms of the lesson here, I think we should understand a few things, and I think the idea here in terms of the Renaissance sermon, this axis, right? There's an axis in the zodiacal wheel between Virgo and Pisces, right? These are like two opposing signs, but this example here is that Pisces would represent mystery and Virgo would represent things like the detail, being like more detail oriented. And if you go back to ancient times, right? Go back to ancient times with a current day wristwatch, and the people would assign all different types of mystery Pisces to this particular watch. But today we have a Virgoian understanding of what this is, what this particular thing is, right? And like we handle this, right? If we need a new watch in any case, we know how to make that happen. We know how to find out someone. Society has really bridged us to the people that can make it happen in a way. In terms of like education and books, I think we need to understand this. There's another axis. It's the Sagittarius Gemini axis here, right? Because Gemini is opposite from Sagittarius, right? And Gemini will represent the skills, education, and information that is really more readily available, right? And in terms of today, we should understand that books, while they're physically here many times, they are still Sagittarius in that they are not readily digested by our society. As they exist today, like our phones, I would say our phones, which are Gemini, computers, which are Gemini, they're really kind of taken up and and really, I mean, holding the space hostage in some respect in terms of the actual energetic space here. But still, it's our responsibility to make sure that the next generation, they have a new definition for Sagittarius and Gemini. Now, this report is on extreme confinement, or a practice known as deadlocking. And the author is a whistleblower. And she worked at Rikers Island as a clinical supervisor for mental health. And this practice is, I don't know how to, like, it is monstrous, absolutely monstrous. And this particular segment, I think it does highlight how many prison guards or people involved in prisons are just sick people who enjoy having authority over other people in order to better hurt them with less oversight. Because in deadlocking, the prisoner is simply kept in a cell for weeks or months without going outside or getting breaks. And a lot of y'all are like, oh, this sounds a lot like solitary confinement, which is bad in itself. But I need to remind you guys that these people are mentally ill, right? It is it is by no stretch of the imagination a surprise to think that these people descend further into mental decline. And to make matters way worse, the prisoners who are in here, they don't get medication. The guards don't even have to document this, right? And this practice was widely accepted as normal around the prison. Now, this lady, she made it out, and she blew the whistle after she left her job with them, right? And it goes to show, I think, that really evil prevails when good fails to speak up or act. Or maybe everyone that accepted this practice are simply demented, troubled people. I like to think of the former, but institutions are, I would say, very good at normalizing corruption and just practices that are just generally repulsive, right? They have this thing where essentially providing a subtle pressure to establish this culture for people to not ask questions, right? And people need to understand, like, this idea of whistleblower and whistleblowing. This lady took a lot of risk, right? Despite being in another particular job or whatever, and she was smart about getting into a new job before she did that, because many times I think a lot of us have this illusion about the life of a whistleblower after blowing the whistle, right? Because a lot of these guys, they don't find refuge in Russia. They don't get like happy endings where the government decides to become a good guy and help them. And in fact, many of these corporations and institutions have protocols to get rid of or make life extremely difficult for people who decide to talk about the cultures and the ways in which they do things. A lot of these guys just simply just go crazy, lose their families in terms of like they have to, or they end up like not killed, or not having their family members killed, but actually having to like move away from them at some point because of like breakups and stuff like that. And in terms of this Renaissance sermon, I think crazy, I feel like I mentioned Pisces a lot, but I think Pisces is something that we should really understand here, because this represents a spectrum of things, but I think it really does hammer on, particularly in this segment, the idea of ruling over prisons, isolation, as well as mental health, right? So my practice, in terms of the way I'm looking at, or the way my method for studying astrology and using astrology, is called zodiacal alchemy, right? And it's important that we realize in zodiacal alchemy that coupling a lot of these situations can be beneficial in some ways, right? In terms of coupling rulerships, right? So like, in the right way, you have to do it, right? You have to treat this like an art and a science. It's not, it's not smart to, I mean, to essentially put a prisoner, Pisces in isolation, Pisces, because that would definitely result in or exacerbate mental health issues, Pisces. But we got to realize that there's a very real combination that could take place here, right? Because in this case, the prisoners, the guards, the culture didn't care about the inmates. They didn't care about the patients. But when we do address these things, it's important that we, in zodiacal alchemy, to understand that we can put these things in a certain way to where we can create better systems for healing. And like, just to give you an idea, like, art therapy is something that would be Pisces related in terms of understanding, demonstrate a certain understanding and knowledge of what's going on, or awareness. Dancing as well. And I mean, I'm not gonna like expose myself with the more unconventional ways to help, but the idea is that we can do this the right way, and I would like us to really certainly start to think about that at the very least. Guys, that's the end of the segment. In terms of the musings for this particular episode, we're in the beginning of July 2025, where we talked about it earlier in this episode, how the administration went mask off and basically announced themselves as the deep state. But I really want you guys to think about how to transform an agency, particularly like, let's say, the FBI, into something that benefits society and benefits the quality of life of people in that society, or better benefit. I'm not going to completely throw the FBI under the bus, but the question is what would you do, and what would the new focus be? And very much just as important is, how can it gain real, genuine trust?